latest HeadBox webinar. Thank you for taking the time to join us. I hope you're all staying cool and sitting comfortably. The most important thing is somewhere with air conditioning. I can safely say that I'm not, so I apologize for the slight shimmer on my forehead as we go through the next hour. This week saw the lifting of almost all legal restrictions in England. Removed with a more cautious approach than we were anticipating a few months ago, it is nonetheless a very important moment for the events and hospitality industries. Over the last 16 months, we've seen the industry adapt rapidly, get creative, and pivot to virtual in a brilliant way. Now, as in-person events begin to return slowly, hybrid events are rapidly becoming the new hot topic. But the question we're going to explore today is, what exactly is a hybrid event, and should you be hosting them? Over the next hour, our panel will be exploring hybrid events from conception, budgets, and planning all the way through to execution. We'll explore the reality of hosting hybrid events alongside their benefits and limitations, and how they can fit into your events program as the industry opens up once again. Please feel free to ask questions throughout. Let's keep the chat alive, and we'll also have some time at the end for questions to revisit anything put in the chat. So without further ado, let's meet the panel, starting with yourself, Sheridan.
Hi everyone and welcome. So my name's Sheridan. I'm the head of events at HeadBox. So it's my role to look after our clients through every medium of event, but at the moment more so the hybrid medium. So I've worked with a lot of our clients from start to finish on how they bring their hybrid event to life.
Amazing. Over to you, George.
Hi there, my name's George Foden. I'm a director at Wise Productions. So we are a technical event production company. And like many of our fellow production companies over the last 18 months, we've pivoted over to digital event delivery to the point where we actually converted our warehouse in West London to 2 fully functioning broadcast studios. So as these restrictions ease, we are now delivering the technical aspects of a lot more hybrid events. So we're sort of combining our original kind of event production pedigree of lighting, sound, video, staging, set design with that broadcast component of cameras, graphics, live streaming and content. So yeah, we're starting to deliver a lot more of these events and look forward to kind of sharing some of our learnings that we've experienced along the way.
Amazing. Over to you, Vanessa.
And I am Vanessa at Glisser, and I feel like sort of complementing Sheridan and George's experience as well, as Glisser is one of the virtual and hybrid event platforms which enable organisers to actually run and deliver these hybrid events in a way that's really engaging for both online and in-person attendees. And my background is as an event organiser, so I was very much working on digital and virtual events for the last, since 2012 was when I did my first one, which is 9 years ago now, which is slightly terrifying. And so well before the pandemic, and I have a really good understanding of why these are hard, because they are, let's be honest, they are not easy things to do. And some of the new techniques I think that we need to actually putting into place to try and make them effective, because we've got all of these new technologies and requirements upon us now, and it's all a big learning curve. So it's really great to be here today.
Well, thank you all for joining today. Just to round things up, I'm Jamie. I also work at HeadBox with Sheridan, but for today, I won't be one of your experts. I'll be your host, which is very exciting for me, hoping to extract some of these great insights out of these great minds. So let's dig in. Starting off, there has been a lot of discussion around hybrid events and hybrid paving the way for the future over the last 15 months. Question number one that we want to put to the panel is, what exactly is a hybrid event? Let's go to you, George.
Well, that is the big question of the day, isn't it? What is a hybrid event? And I sort of think that the industry is still answering that question. I don't think there is one answer that is correct. I think there's a number of different definitions floating around. I think for us, in terms of when we look at hybrid events and when we try and sort of work with a client to deliver them on a technical level, I think our definition will be satisfied by saying, are you truly investing in the delivery of this event to both your in-person audience and your online audience? Are you curating an experience for both and giving sufficient attention to both? So, you know, I think there is not really a case of, well, here's my live event format, and I'm just going to put a camera at the back of the room and stream that. Hey, the event's hybrid. Now, you know, yes, you are delivering an online component, but I wouldn't say at that point you've really invested both time, thought, energy, and financial investment in that online component. So I think really for an event to be truly hybrid, equal attention and different attention needs to be given to both components, so each audience is getting that truly curated experience for them.
Amazing, a very good initial definition, and I think there's the really interesting point there is it's unknown, and there are a lot of varied definitions going on. So Vanessa, let's hear what you've got to say about the definition of hybrid events.
Yeah, so the first thing I'll probably say is that some people really hate this phrase, hybrid events. It is very polarizing. And I think the fact is, like it or loathe it, at this moment in time, it represents something quite important for the sector, which is progress and movement out of online only events and into the next phase, whatever that phase might mean for your organization. And it's going to the definition is going to vary according to your event, the goals of your event, and what you're trying to ultimately achieve. But definitely following from what George said, it's about creating a very meaningful and valuable experience for two different audiences. Some who are going to join you in person and some who are going to join you online. Those could be simultaneously, they could be separately. Some, perhaps pre-event is all online, then you have your main event at the center, and post-event is all online afterwards. But fundamentally, I think the way we'll ultimately go over the next year or two, and I actually really hope this is the case, is that you'll end up with the core event being that in-person activity that will just be surrounded by various different types of online activity, a little bit like solar system, where you've got the sun at the center, that's your main event, and then around it you've got various types of online activity that are complementing it and making it more cohesive and an overall expanded experience of the event. But I do think quality, exactly what George said, is super important. Very high expectations from the audience of both in-person events and of online. So your overall hybrid experience should be something really quite special.
That's really interesting. And I think that simple definition of some people in person, some people virtual, it might be the best definition of it that I've heard. And just to quickly follow up from that with that simple definition, many bookers that I've talked to have struggled with how to explain hybrid events to people who are not event professionals, the stakeholders that they work with. Would you have any advice on the similar lines that you would give to a booker trying to explain a hybrid event to somebody who's holding that budget and is a bit confused?
That for me as well.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I think it really comes down to what the event is trying to achieve, because you could give the booker a definition that they can pass on that if it's not relevant to their particular event, it actually could confuse matters even more. So always about what are the goals of the event? Why are you trying to do this in the first place? And then working backwards. So that means, therefore, we should have a certain number of people in the room doing X. And actually, we can also include this additional group of people online doing Y. That's what the definition should be. It's just got to be around the event itself and what you're trying to achieve. And I think if we try and broad brush everything into one nice neat box, it's actually probably going to cause more confusion. So I guess I'm saying a little bit of complexity actually makes this more simple, which sounds a bit backwards.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that's a really good piece of advice. Hopefully people logging in will take away. Start with the event objective and work your way back to the medium. I think it's a really powerful bit of advice. So moving on from that, let's talk about the benefits of hosting a hybrid event. Let's go to you, Sheridan.
I think there's lots of benefits of a hybrid event. There's lots of considerations, but there are lots of benefits. And I think one of the most obvious ones is you can reach a much wider audience. But if we were to focus down into one area, which is really important to a lot of corporates and a lot of companies at the moment, is the sustainability piece. We have seen a lot of corporate clients and non-corporate clients all focusing on sustainability and how they can improve these initiatives and how they can essentially carbon offset their events. If we look back to pre-pandemic times, if you can cast your mind back that far, we ran an event at HeadBox that was for one of our clients for 1,300 people. It was a huge global event. It was fantastic to work on. We had 2 live conference days and we had 1 huge after party. And there were people coming from all over the globe, various different things happening at various different times. And we actually helped our client completely carbon offset that entire event. And that was entirely physical. Now, if you think if we were to run that event in a hybrid setting today, how much easier that would be to carbon offset. You don't have to worry about flights. You don't have to worry about how you're transporting locally. You don't have to worry about any of those things. You don't have to worry about any of the facilities that you're using within a venue. It's much easier to actually cool down your carbon footprint and manage that much better. So I think from a sustainability factor, hybrid events are going to be here to stay for one, but they make corporates a lot easier and clients a lot easier to actually manage their carbon footprint.
Interesting. And I know we've talked previously, Vanessa, about sustainability. How do you see sustainability being a huge benefit of hybrid? Oh, have we got you on mute? Is that just me?
Apologies, no, that I had accidentally pressed a button on my keyboard. There you go. Work in virtual events and still can't do them myself. Very much continuing on to what Sheridan said there, because the fact is, travel to events, building exhibitions, feeding people quite indulgent food very often, hotel accommodation, laundry. I mean, the list is massive involved with travel to and from events, and no doubt that this is going to go back on the radar. So pre-pandemic, this was a huge issue for the event sector. It finally kind of got its way to the top of the tree, and it's then plummeted, but maybe with good reason, because we haven't had to really worry about the carbon footprint of the sector for the last 18 months, but it's going to come back up. And it's now not just we could save or achieve sustainability targets by having more online activity. It's now we will do this because we've already been doing it. So we're not asking people to learn something new or to do something out of their comfort zone, because we've all got quite comfortable with it. So it's become far more obtainable, I think, which is really quite exciting.
Perfect. George, are there any benefits of venues too?
Venues, I think absolutely. I think, hybrid gives an opportunity to venues to really sort of extend their offering and think about what other facilities and services that they could offer a client to support the online components of the event. And, for example, we're working on projects at the moment that are your traditional in-person, let's say, gala event, like a charity fundraiser or annual corporate gala event, that, dinner, entertainment, things like that. And some of the concepts we're working on with those clients are that to support the hybrid event delivery, we actually have a separate studio set up elsewhere in the venue, in another part of the venue, perhaps part of the venue that is seldom seen. So, it could be an interesting, quirky space that isn't really suited to put a large number of guests in, but perfect for a broadcast studio. And the idea is that during the event, let's say when the people in the room are having their dinner, not very interesting, live streaming people having their dinner, then we've got this sort of punditry studio somewhere else in the venue where you've got hosts maybe conducting interviews with maybe some of the talent that's performing the event, some exclusive content for the online audience. So, thinking that venue, that's another sale of another space that wouldn't have otherwise been utilized for the usual in-person event format. I also think there's an opportunity for venues to have longer tenancies because to do hybrid really, really well, and perhaps something we might touch on later, rehearsal time is essential. You're doing live broadcast, there's nowhere to hide. And, the more rehearsal time you can give, the better the quality of output's going to be. So I think you're going to start seeing clients who want to do hybrid really well take venue bookings for a longer period because they want more of that time to get the delivery of the show really, really slick. That's going to hopefully be a benefit to venues who, perhaps experience some longer booking times as a result of that. I think also, everyone's big fear when it comes to any kind of online streaming is the technology. And I think if venues invest in really, really good connectivity, maybe with backup systems to say to clients, hey, look, we've got our main internet connection here, but we've also got this 5G backup system we can offer you as well. We've also got, an on-site engineer from our IT team who's going to make sure everything's working smoothly. Those are all kind of things that I think clients are going to be very willing to invest in to give them the peace of mind that the delivery of the online component is going to work. It's a bit like, we thinking back to physical events, we work at a lot of venues where an electrician comes with the venue, because hey, you want the lights to be on and you want the air conditioning to work and things like that. And if you're now doing hybrid, then I think that kind of peace of mind extends to the connectivity piece as well. So I think venues have got a lot of opportunity to kind of upskill and upsell their services to kind of support hybrid, because I think there's an appetite amongst clients to make sure that they've got that.
Jamie, would you mind if I add one extra benefit?
Absolutely. Feel free to jump in.
Super short. It really helps to mitigate risk at this moment in time, when there's still a question of how many people will be okay, how many people will want to travel to an event, even if it's safe and legal and so on and so forth. Companies still have a real duty of care to their employees, and employees also still have personal choice that they may be working around with home requirements too. So I think it's a massive benefit for planners, that so bookers, that this does help reduce your risk. And right now, anything we can do to reduce risk is a really, really important part of that. We're still in recovery of this sector. Make no mistake, we've got a long way to go to get back to where we once were, but we're actually going in a really positive way to get there. So I just think risk management can't be undervalued for the hybrid approach at the moment.
I think as well, just to jump in there too, clients are gasping to get back into the venues that they know and love. A lot of our clients have got their own preferred venues that they've been really missing over the past 15 months or so. And I think venues will really start to see an influx in these events. And for some of the roadmaps that we're doing, the venues may actually start to see that you'll get smaller bookings but a higher volume of them. So where we are doing a lot more of these hybrid events, you will get smaller audiences and smaller numbers to cater for, but you may get them much more frequently. So to be honest, the amount of bookings that you get, we're hoping isn't going to be affected too much, but that's definitely a benefit for the venues as well.
Great stuff. So we've talked a bit about the benefits, but what should a client be considering when they are planning a hybrid event? We've talked about the willingness to pay for risk mitigation. Are there any other kind of considerations that bookers should be working through in this new world? George?
There are many. There really are many. And I think the one thing we've sort of learnt along the way of delivering some of these hybrid projects is you need to have two mindsets. You need to have your live event mindset, and you need to have your online event mindset. And you need to sort of understand that a decision made for one may have an impact on the other. And there's, I wouldn't call it a tension, but there needs to be a consideration between the two. So, and that goes for everything: choice of venue, space, time for rehearsal, all of those things. The rules that applied, or not the rules, but the considerations that applied in live event world may be inappropriate for the online component. So I think having those two mindsets is really important. And I think it's very easy for us to all fall back into the live event mindset of thinking, because that hybrid component is often a little bit out of sight, out of mind. When you're there in the room watching the event, it's easy to think about, well, what's going on in the room? What's the impact on the physical event attendees? And I think you need to always consider, but what actually am my online audience seeing at this point? And often when we receive briefs for hybrid events, it's often very much a live event agenda. It's been designed with a live event in mind, with sort of streaming bolted on. And often we sort of say to clients, why don't we take a few steps backwards here and actually start redesigning your agenda from scratch, or looking at the event. Is the duration appropriate for the online audience? Maybe if the duration needs to be this long for the live audience, maybe the live stream should start later or finish earlier, and then something else happens. So I think there's some timing considerations to think about. And then I hate to sort of bring up the dreaded B word, but budgets. You've got to invest in the online component, and ultimately that has an impact on budgets. And I think there has been a tendency when it comes to approach to hybrid that start with your live event budget you used to have historically, and see if you can shoehorn in enough to make the online bit work. And either you're going to be taking away budget from your live event to the detriment of the people attending, or you're not going to be investing sufficiently in your online event to do it properly. And then the question is, why are you doing it at all? If it's not going to be amazing and high quality and engaging, then maybe don't make it hybrid on this occasion. And I've had some sort of fairly honest conversations along those lines when the budget has just not stacked up against what the client is looking to achieve in terms of the online delivery. So yeah, many considerations. Those would sort of be my sort of top two at this point in time.
That's super interesting. And it's interesting you talk about budgets, because we've just talked about people willing to pay more money, higher budgets for kind of risk mitigation. Is one of the current barriers we're seeing is the decision to go hybrid, is that there's a bit of resistance to go big to start with. Once they're there, they're willing to pay more.
I think that's right. I think, you know, the problem is you know, planners who've worked in this industry a long time, they've got plenty of budget history. They've got plenty to work on. You know, often, especially when it's annual events, you know what it costs. You know, people have got an understanding of, you know, if I'm going to have this many people, I've got to feed them. I've got to have a venue big enough for them. I need to have the production so they could all see and hear. You know, and those costs are fairly well known. I think hybrid now introduces this component that is a little bit unknown. And there is physical infrastructure needed. So as a production company, we need to bring the cameras, we need to bring the streaming equipment, the graphics equipment, the additional personnel to operate all of that. But there's also this other investment that I think also gets lost, and that is in the additional content needed to make it a broadcast. And that might be graphics, or it might be investing in some pre-recorded content that you're going to play to kind of segue between different sections of the event. Like I alluded to earlier with your traditional gala event format, if you've got periods of time during your hybrid event that there is no content being delivered on your main live event stage, well, what are you pushing to the online audience? Do you need to have some pre-recorded content made to fill those gaps and give yourself some breathing space while the live event audience is having a 15-minute coffee break? Because that all costs money to produce well. And I think, you know, what we're starting to see now is what do we all digest all day long? We all digest the very best broadcast content. So we're all watching Netflix, we're all watching Amazon Prime, we're all watching BBC documentaries. So we're all being exposed to content that's been made with very grown-up budgets. And then we all have stakeholders within, you know, clients' businesses who say, well, I want it to look like that. You know, I want it to look really, really good. I want it to be filmed beautifully. I want to get a really good director to make the content. And I want it all scripted really well. And I want it all to be shot in interesting locations. And one thing I often say to clients, I say, okay, that's great. That's the aspiration. When you watch those programs and you see the credits roll at the end, there's a lot of names there who are all being paid to make the content that good. And you see role names that you never even thought existed, you know, second unit director, what's one of them, you know? And I think that's often what we kind of say, look, to get content looking that amazing takes an army of people, and it takes time, and it needs to be planned. And then I think people realize, you know, the investment needed to make things really, really that good. You know, and I often get, you know, briefs that cross my path saying, oh, we watched the latest Apple phone launch, we want it to look like that. And again, we sort of say, you know, to get things looking that good and that slick and that on point with amazing graphics and things like that, there's a level of investment there. And I think if the aspiration is there within your business to do it that well, then be prepared for some sort of pretty grown-up conversations about the resources needed to get it delivered to that level.
I think as well, just going on that point, is it's not necessarily just the investment in budget, which is obviously a huge consideration, but it's also the investment in time. I mean, as we've seen working together over the past year or so, specifically, George, we've got a lot of clients where they are trying to mature their virtual events into this hybrid setting and not quite understanding the amount of information that we need to make that happen for them. So when we're getting an agenda in to say, so-and-so is going to speak here, and then here, and then here, and then so-and-so is coming in from this remote location, and they're going to speak from here, we're then trying to say to them, okay, brilliant. Well, who's got to hear who? who's conversing with who, and trying to then build in this production run of show so that the production team know exactly what's happening and when. And it's been a real education piece. And our clients are really starting to see that actually there's a lot more work that goes into a hybrid event than goes into a virtual event. And it's not a case of just dialing into a Zoom call anymore and everyone taking their turn to speak, but more so, is everyone mic'd up correctly? Can everyone see what everyone else is seeing? How are the remote speakers looking on screen in comparison to the in-studio speakers? Are the two audiences, remote and in person, meant to converse with each other also? Are you going to throw a question to an audience member in the venue and expect the remote audience to be able to hear them? How are you going to mic those up? And it's all of these questions that we're kind of throwing at clients at the moment, and they're saying, I haven't thought about that yet. Okay, great. Well, this is how it will work, but also this is how much it will cost. And they've got really high aspirations, like George said, to create this really seamless broadcast, much like Anton Deck's Saturday Night Takeaway, where you can just throw to someone in the audience. And actually, when you strip that back and look at what's required to do that, there's been a few concerned faces being thrown around the virtual rooms. And that's really what we're here to help as well, is building out that run of show and educating clients just how much time you need, not only to build out that agenda, but also the rehearsal time needed too.
Yeah.
I see you nodding along, Vanessa. What have you seen of these considerations?
So much agreement with everything that has been said. And so actually, I only really just thought about this, but based on what George and Sheridan have said, have an open mind. Have a really, really open mind to all of your suppliers' suggestions, because most likely they have got more experience in doing this than you, which won't necessarily be for long, but really listen to what the people who have done this already are telling you. And if that means changing your plans to deliver your goals, I'm going to really keep going on that one, then change your plans and accept a little bit more discomfort in the short term for benefit in the long term. The thing that really also stands out for me from personal experience, having very recently run a multi-hybrid, that's not what I want to say, multi-hub hybrid event, it's a bit of a mouthful, was the power of having a really excellent moderator to bring together both the in-room audience and the online audience into something that was separately really, really meaningful, but collectively also engaging, was worth every single penny that we invested in that. So I would really encourage any organizer starting this new hybrid journey to consider how they're going to use moderators to make it really a powerful experience for all. And I would also consider allocating different team members to be responsible for the in-room experience and the online experience, who are constantly talking to each other. They're the same team, but they are different individuals who are responsible for those two experiences, because this is the massive difference, that the old events that we used to run were in person, one single experience, or online, one single experience. And now we're trying to juggle two. And you want both to be fantastic, and that takes ownership and it requires ownership. And it's often just too much for one person, to be honest, at the moment, whilst we're really setting out on this. So accountability, really good if you can separate it out at all. So those are two really, I think, sort of tactical approaches to take. But yeah, just keep an open mind. Oh, sorry, I've got one more thing on the budget. George said often it's like we'll dip our toe in the water and then scale up from there. I would actually recommend do the opposite. If you can afford it, go big to start with, work it out, just chuck yourself in and learn, and then say, actually, next time we won't do it like that. We'll do it like this, which will be better. But without doing that first test run and trialing the different options, you actually don't really know what's going to work and what's not. And if you're just dipping your toe in the water, I think you're probably more likely to get disappointed, either yourself as the host of the event, or possibly you might disappoint one audience group, and you're much better off going for it and then scaling back as opposed to the other way around. Easy said than done, I realise.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I think that's a really nice segue into our next point. We've talked a lot about budget, and I think it's universally agreed that the best way to maneuver into hybrid is to go big, is to accept that this is a new, different sort of budget we've worked for. With that and planning of hybrid events, and with the bigger budgets, there becomes large scrutiny over the event outcomes and in particularly ROI. So Sheridan, your experience, how do you measure ROI in a hybrid event?
There's lots of different ways to measure ROI based on the objectives of your event, who you're hosting your event for, why, what are the messages you're trying to get out. And ultimately, you've got to think of, are you looking for leads? Is it more of a marketing event? Are you looking for a call to action of the event? Is it something internal you're trying to promote internal messaging? Is it more about attendance for you? Depending on what your key goal is for that specific event will very much depend on how you measure the ROI. But I think going with what Vanessa just said there is you kind of do have to go big or go home if you are really going to get this ROI. And going back on everything that George and Vanessa have spoken about already this afternoon, you've got to think you've got two extremely different audiences with extremely different requirements. And if you don't cater to both requirements and you fare one more than the other, you're going to see that ROI will dip depending on which one you favored the most. So for example, if you are favoring your in-person audience and your remote audience are feeling like they're kind of got the cheap seats, second best, they're probably not going to return to your future events, especially if it's in a hybrid setting. If they can't physically be there in person, they're going to have the impression that they weren't really thought about, and it probably wasn't any different than just, reading a few emails and maybe watching a little bit of on-demand content later, so they can catch up in other ways. Whereas if you throw the curve the other way and you really focus on your remote audience as well as your in-person audience, and you really have factored in both, you'll start to see a real big return on attendance. We've got a lot of clients at the moment who are working on a series of events where it's the same audience coming back, different messaging every time, but the same audience. So in order to keep that captivated audience, you've really got to make it a great experience for them. And likewise for your in-person. It's a lot easier now for us to attend remotely. And for some people, it's more favorable. And so if you don't really cater to that audience and go big on that setting, much like Vanessa just said, that's where you're really going to struggle in getting the attendance that you want on your hybrid events.
Great. And any builds on that, George?
Yeah, I think it's also very difficult because when it comes to ROI, you might place a different weighting on the in-person audience compared to the virtual digital audience. And I think one of the big questions is one more valuable than the other? Well, it probably depends on the events. If you have 50 people in the room and 500 watching online, it probably depends on, well, who are those 50? Why have they been invited to be there? And why are the 500 not? That might be that, I see a lot of events at the moment where they say, well, invite the most important people to the event because, they're the ones we need to be there. Often when it comes to things like hybrid award ceremonies, well, we'll get all the winners there on the night and everybody else can watch online. And therefore, I think, it's like, well, if the winners at the event are already, sort of bought into it and already stakeholders, then really it's about your online audience. They're the ones you need to sort of convert to your message and you want to sort of deliver some key messaging to. So I think it also depends on that audience split. And I think everybody's grappling with that at the moment. And I think there's an assumption that maybe still the people in the room are the ones who need to be looked after. But one of the things I often sort of say to people is that if you're doing hybrid really, really well, I'll be honest and say that the people in the room may not have the best experience. And the sort of thing I often tell people is that if you've ever been to the filming of a live television show, being in the audience is often not great. There's a lot of sitting around whilst things are tweaked and rehearsals happen, and often someone comes out on stage and tells you when you're going to have to clap, when you're going to have to be quiet, and all that sort of thing. Often in TV studios, you have the stage and the set, then you have a whole bunch of cameras, and then you have the audience. So often, half the time, you might have a camera between you and the person on stage, so you might not have the best view. There's a lot of audio considerations when it comes to live broadcast. So often the sound within the studio has to be very carefully controlled to make sure we're dealing with sort of audio delays and things. So, there's often an assumption that the live audience is going to get the best experience, but perhaps sometimes actually it might be better watching it online. And, I often say to people, if you ever been at a festival versus watching it on TV. A lot of people say, I'd rather watch Glastonbury on TV than actually go there in person. And other people will say, oh no, got to be there in person. TV's never the same. So I think different audiences have different expectations, and when it comes to ROI, you're grappling with that tension all the time, I think.
Yeah, this is such a challenging one, and the only thing I think I'd add into both of those spot on viewpoints is set out with a few key metrics in mind and just try and measure those, as opposed to all of the things that you'll discover along the way. So maybe think of, the 4, 5, 10, however many there might be, key metrics that you really want to measure, stick like glue to those, and along the way identify those that you perhaps weren't expecting and build those into the next one. So you can't expect to know the perfect KPIs to be looking at before you've done one. Go with something, stay really true to those, but then again, open your eyes and see what else presents along the way. So I guess be a little bit kind to yourself along the way. Maybe don't expect everything to perform perfectly first time around, but make sure that a few things really, really do.
Great. Following on theme from the previous question, try it. Go do a hybrid event, learn and improve for future. And that's really good advice. Moving slightly away from the ins and outs of hybrid directly. Freedom Day happened on Monday, a cautious entry into the outside world. With these easing of restrictions, the big question that I think everyone's either feeling or being a part of the response or speculating is, how are event bookers and event planners navigating these changes? Are you seeing confidence return to in-person events, or are you seeing kind of the continuation of, I guess, virtual as a replacement for in-person, or leaning on hybrid to counter this caution? Sheridan, what have you been seeing?
This has been actually a really interesting conversation that I've been having and observing with my clients over the past few months, knowing that Freedom Day was on its way, and especially over the past few days. The general feeling, to be quite brash, is that our clients and people in general aren't having a huge amount of faith in our government decisions anymore. So they're kind of taking the decisions into their own hands. And so various different people are progressing with various different levels of caution. You've got some people who are desperate to be back together. Great, the government said we can do it. Let's go for it. We've got a lot of big events that we're planning. We want to be executing them as soon as possible once people return from annual leave and such over the summer. You've got those who really want to be back together, but not sure whether they should. At the end of the day, everyone has got a duty of care to their employees and their attendees, the guests that they're bringing along with them. And then you've got those that are absolutely no way. No, we've still got 40,000 new cases today. This seems like a terrible idea. One person in our office tests positive, the whole office has gone down again, we're going to stick with virtual. So we're very much seeing all three in very equal measures. But I think where clients are really gaining the most traction is this hybrid piece, because they really are curious about it. They want to have people in person, they want to make sure they can still have people at home, they want to make it inclusive for everyone. But as for all of the reasons that we've just been talking about, they're not entirely sure how to do it. So everyone is treading with care at the moment. But we're also seeing some really great initiatives coming in both the hybrid sector and the in-person. And this is through an example of a traffic light system, one that we're actually putting in place for an event tomorrow. And the traffic light system is exactly those three things. So red is very much, I'm very cautious. I want to keep socially distanced from people. I'm happy to be there in person, but I'm very much sticking to previous guidelines. Amber being, I'm not so bothered about social distancing, but please no handshakes, certainly no hugs, don't touch me. And the green is very much, no, let's go pre-2019, let's just go for it. I want to be dancing, I want to be singing, I want to be hugging the employees I haven't seen for the past 18 months. And these initiatives are coming in through wristbands, through lanyards, so people can actually make their own decision. You've been invited to this event, it is going to be in person, would you like to attend? These are the provisions we're putting in place. And a lot of guests are really appreciating that, really appreciating the fact that they've still got the opportunity to attend, and they don't feel like they're, again, with the cheap seats, because they want to stay socially distanced. So, what's my experience going to be like? They very much still got the same experience as others. And I think as well with the terms and conditions that everyone's putting in place now is very much, we'd love to run this as a virtual event, but we know that it's not the same experience as in person. So please come to our in-person event and adhere to these T's and C's, such as if you're having symptoms, please don't attend, don't come anywhere near, or get a test. If you know you've been in contact with anyone who's tested positive, again, make sure you get a test before you attend, or if you're self-isolating, please kind of stay away. But with hybrid as well, even if you're in any of those realms of not being able to attend in person, you're still then able to attend remotely. And even if that is such a thing as more on-demand content, much like Vanessa said earlier, if it's just your pre-event and your post-event, that's the hybrid element, clients are still really appreciating that that's available to them. So I think we've got 3 very different levels of caution. Clients aren't really sure which way to go. You've got your really extroverted clients all for it, and some that are hanging back a little bit. And I think virtual is going to be here to stay for a very long time.
I love the idea of the traffic light system. I wonder if there'll be any trading of wristbands throughout the evening, trying to upgrade to green at 9 p.m.
The drinks have been had, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Vanessa, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely share what our clients are sharing with us, which is so many, particularly corporates, are very publicly embracing hybrid work. And so they need to be able to provide a way to attend meetings and events online to embrace that really, truly and fully. And that doesn't mean they don't want to have an in-person experience. It just is the fact is, to be inclusive with this new approach to hybrid work, they also need to be able to offer the online option to be included in a meeting or an event as well. And I find that fascinating, actually, because it's part of the whole change of the hybrid world that we're basically now moving into. You know, people have doctor's appointments online. The thought of that 2 years ago was just completely extraordinary, and now it's incredibly standard. People are working in a much more hybrid fashion. Again, the extent that that's happening 2 years ago was just a different world. And finally, events play a really important part in this. I think events have always been perhaps too much of a supporting role in businesses than they should have been. And actually now they can become a really important contributor into the future way of working. And I find that really exciting. And the other aspect, which is a slight detour, but I still think relevant to the sorts of people that will be watching this, is the intelligence that event organisers now have on their attendees is massive compared to how it used to be. And so that also plays a really important part in people's decision-making around hybrid events and the adoption of them, that the digital element particularly just gives you intelligence that you simply didn't have to the same degree before. So it elevates the authority, if you will, of the event organisers and the ability of those individuals to contribute into the overall business goals and objectives, including things like sustainability. So yeah, I just feel like we're in a very empowered position right now. We've got to really grab it and use that position to our advantage. And the digital element plays a big role in that. So yeah, our customers are definitely doing both, very much from an inclusivity standpoint as well.
Great stuff. And we're moving through time, which is getting lost in the hybrid world. So we'll move through the next couple of questions quite swiftly, and then hopefully get to a couple of questions that have come from the audience. So again, we're all aligned that hybrid events are a great thing, but how do businesses introduce hybrid events into their event programs? So Vanessa, we'll head back to you for this one.
Just, sorry, could you say the question again?
Sorry, how do businesses introduce hybrid events into their events program?
Ooh, so the most important thing here, I think, is you go back to your goals, again, really, really important, but then design the whole event around being hybrid and try not to retrofit hybrid into an existing event. So George referenced this as well earlier, and he said sometimes you see an event that's being clearly designed to be live, trying to be repositioned into something different. You've really got to go right back to the beginning, start from scratch. Who's involved? Why? What are we trying to achieve with them? Why? And therefore, what do we build to make that happen? So design a hybrid, I think, is really important. And I'm sorry if I'm sounding like a broken record on this with your goals in mind. It's just, there's no point doing it if you're not making it about your goals. There's just no point doing it. So yeah, design for hybrid would be my answer.
I also think less is more in a hybrid capacity as well. We've had a lot of our clients over the past year have run frequently virtual events and hybrid events because they want to keep that level of engagement and interaction going with their team or with their clients, and it starts to become quite monotonous. And so what I would say with hybrid events, especially considering all of the factors we have to take into account, such as budget, time involvement, do less frequent hybrid events, but do them better. So much like what Vanessa was saying earlier, just jump in with both feet. Forget about dipping your toe in the water. You're going to get colder quicker doing it that way. So just jump in, shoulders under. That's how you want to be. And I think, you know, everything that George was saying earlier and everything that the actual live broadcast of it, your client base and your attendees will very much look forward to your next event. If they know it's going to be awesome, then having to think, oh, the next month's coming along, let's look out for this webinar. Wonder what this one's going to be like.
Yeah, and with that keeping it simple point, even go as far as just do a one-page document about what you're trying to achieve and how you're trying to achieve it, and share that with your suppliers as well, so that they get it. They're on the same page. They have total transparency then of what your goals are. And when they know your goals, they're more likely to help you achieve it and not take you off down, what's it called, a blind alley or whatever, the wrong path, because something looks quite cool. They're just going to stay, hopefully, laser focused on helping you achieve your goals. And I'm sure, George, you're probably in this position all the time. If you know what a client's goals are, you're going to advise them in that direction and not be distracted by other things that might be useful, but you've got to know their goals to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. I think when it comes to the broadcast, there's so many routes and directions you can go in, and I think sort of setting off on the right path is very important, because I think one thing we haven't really talked about in this conversation so far is lead times. I think the other challenge when it comes to hybrid is we are being presented with some very challenging lead times at the moment because of the nature of the pandemic, and everything is changing all the time. That, you know, we're rarely getting the luxury of many months to plan something. Often we're presented with you know, a few weeks lead time, or sometimes even less. And also we are often presented with, well, here's plan A, but also we need a plan B, a plan C, and a plan D, which all the hybrid component is a little bit different for each one. So I think, yeah, absolutely getting the objectives and getting everybody on board at the start and understanding what is the final output going to look like. Because I think that is the other challenge when it comes to hybrid, going back to my point earlier, that everyone's got many years often of live event pedigree. So often your stakeholders know what the event is probably going to look and feel like. They probably don't know what the online component is going to look and feel like. And that goes for everything: the platform, the user experience, the actual broadcast output, the graphics, you know, that whole experience. There's not been a great deal of exposure to that. So often you can feel like you're flying a little bit blind, and perhaps those stakeholders within your business have got an idea in their head of what they think it's going to look like, and that might not be what everybody else is thinking. So I think getting alignment as early as possible saves a lot of pain further down the line.
Great stuff. So let's move swiftly on to the tech. And as I mentioned, I'm really keen to get one particular question that's been asked bolted onto the end. So let's spend 3 to 5 minutes on the tech, and we will have a look into what makes a great hybrid tech platform. And part 2 of the question for efficiency is what's coming next for hybrid technology platforms? And George, we'll come back to you for this.
So what makes a great hybrid platform? There are oodles of platforms out there. You know, there was a point at the start of the pandemic where there was sort of a new one every week, and you know, and I think everybody's sort of tried and tested and found one that they're comfortable with for virtual. Hybrid introduces a whole different component, and a lot of people, I think, are revisiting their sort of initial platform choices now that hybrid's come along. I think, you know, connecting the two audiences really well is going to be the sort of golden thread for platforms going forward. And that, you know, we talked earlier about simple things like, well, if you've got a physical audience and an online audience, how do you kind of create a bit of equilibrium when it comes to things like the Q&A? How do you feel like both are getting equal opportunity to ask questions and interact? I also think it's important for the audience to feel visually connected to each other. You know, the online audience can perhaps see people in the room, And the way to see people in the room is, it might be that in your production budget, you need to allow for a couple of extra cameras with operators pointing back at the audience. So when someone asks a question with the handheld radio microphone in the physical audience, there's a camera on them, because otherwise, the online audience, they're perhaps just hearing this faceless voice and they're not actually seeing who's asking the question. I think that's important. And then vice versa, how can we get, photo and video content from the online audience back to the physical audience, so they can perhaps put faces to names and see who's joining them online. I think, that is a really nice thing to do to connect the audiences. So I think that's what sort of makes a good platform. In terms of what's coming next, frankly, who knows? But I think one thing I've found really interesting recently is, as hybrid, especially within businesses for internal communication, is becoming more and more of a priority, and as companies move to hybrid or even fully remote working, we are talking to a number of clients about actually equipping their business with their own studios. I think as the frequency of events becomes more and more, and whereas companies may have previously invested in lecture theatres and event spaces within their buildings, they are now looking to invest in studios to enable them to not only deliver hybrid more regularly, but get their kind of internal talent, their speakers, their presenters, more comfortable with it by investing in the space. So they've got a turnkey option to deliver these kind of events going forward. So I think that's something we're going to see more and more as this progresses.
Great stuff. And Vanessa, what's your expert opinion from that, coming from Glisser?
Yeah, so I've used lots of platforms in my time pre-Glisser as well, and was buying platforms at the beginning of last year too. So I mean, there are so many out there now. It is a complete minefield, but there are two things that I would absolutely prioritize in platform selection. The first is around engagement. So any research you read, the number one concern that organisers have is how to engage both audiences in a meaningful way. So choose a platform that is going to enable great engagement for those online and those in person. And this is number two, in synchrony. That's the other real crucial piece here, is you do not want to have a group of people online doing one lot of engagement completely separately to those who are in the room. It's a nightmare from a production perspective, putting it bluntly. You end up with two lots of data. It's a segregated experience, and you want to have a cohesive experience. So ideally, you want to be looking for a platform that has sort of live slide sharing, live engagement tools actually built into the platform that everybody is using wherever they happen to be sitting. And there are some which are fantastic for this. There are some which are newer to this, because a lot of these platforms are new, let's be really honest. A lot of them only cropped up in the last year or 18 months or so. So yeah, engagement, synchronized, and I guess actually I'm saying at the end there, experience as well is really worthwhile. So three things that I would build in. And looking forward, community. I definitely see community technology being a really big part of the growth of, I'm going to say hybrid strategy actually, instead of hybrid events, because this is where you start to go beyond just an event by event view, and you actually start to look at an entire communication of content view that could be live or it could be on demand, but ultimately the attendee is able to keep going back to the same place for content, whatever kind of content it might be, live or pre-record and on demand. And that, I think, is also quite an exciting step up that many event organisers have a really good opportunity to grab hold of in the coming years that we've got. Yeah, there's a lot.
I think also the only thing I would say on how to choose your platform, what makes a good tech platform, is simplicity. And Vanessa's spoken a lot about simplicity in terms of the actual event itself, but that really applies to the technology as well. If you think over the past 18 months or so, people have been used to Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and they're the two platforms they're most familiar with. But for a conference, you might need something that's a little bit more sophisticated and offers a little bit more functionality. But if you think when you get to an in-person event, you don't have to think for yourself much beyond the content that you're absorbing. When you arrive, you get told where to register, you get told where to eat, where to drink, where to go to the toilet, where to sit and listen. The same is not it's not the case for your remote audience. Your remote audience, if you've got a platform where you've got your main plenary sessions, where you've got breakouts, you've got downloadable content, you've got a social activity, they have to navigate their way around that event themselves. And you really have to make something you have to use something that's really going to make them feel like they have got access to everything in as little clicks as possible. And that will really keep their level of engagement. Make it too complicated, and there are lots of complicated platforms out there, you are just going to lose your online audience super quick.
Great advice there. And I mentioned that there's one question I wanted to get to because it's come through quite a few times, which was with the skills gap we've talked about a little bit, and embracing this new hybrid environment. Where would you recommend event planners go to start upskilling? Where can they do the learning that's not being thrown into the fire, which I imagine is how over the last 15 months the rest of us have largely learned?
Well, I can tell you there's a great virtual online course that Vanessa actually features in, that I've been taking part in over the past the beginning of last year actually. There are some online courses that you can do. As I personally think with event management in general, you're not going to learn until you do. And so I would really encourage a lot of our bookers to take the risk and book that hybrid event. That's a risk to yourself, not necessarily a risk to us. But, you know, lean on your event agency, lean on your production team, lean on your peers, and you will have that support that you need. But it's very much, you've got a lot of support around, whether that be through online training, whether that be through your network, or, you know, people like HeadBox, Wise, Glisser. We're all here on hand to support you, but I think it's definitely something that you need to learn as you're doing, and not something that you could read out of a textbook, for example.
So, yeah, fair point. I can't add much more to that. There are excellent course providers. There's 2 or 3 that I would recommend. I'm not going to, because I don't want to do that if it's not appropriate, but always happy to afterwards as well. I'm not involved in all of them, I will add. But there are some really great places to do that. But I would also chuck in project management. Lot of moving parts in hybrid events. That's just the fact. And I think it's really important that event organisers make sure their project management skills are red hot right now. I go back to all of that old, how do you run a project really well, and just refresh it, revise it, maybe even take a refresher course for project management online that isn't event specific, just gets you really firing in that PMO mentality, because it is very important in hybrid events. So that's a skill I would definitely be recommending people sharpen up at the moment.
I'm going to say a bit of a weird one here, and that is watch a lot of television, because, you know, if you feel like that you're a live event professional and you've been doing it for many years and you've kind of got that side of it nailed, and you're thinking, well, you know, how do I make the online content really, really engaging? Watch some live television, watch programs that you perhaps haven't watched before. And I emphasize live, because if you are thinking of doing it live, you know, it's a different kettle of fish to pre-recorded. And really look for the small details, and ask yourself, why is this slick? Why am I, you know, entertained here? What's engaging about this? And you'll start to spot little things. You know, oh, look, the presenters are always looking at the right camera. Well, how is that happening? You know, they always start talking at exactly the right moment when they come out of the ad break. Well, how is that happening? And that all isn't happening by chance. That's happening because the production team and all the technology built around them is doing its job. And you know, and also because it's been rehearsed a lot. You know, they've probably been sat in that studio for 3 days rehearsing the last leg on Friday nights at 10 o'clock. So, you know, I would really encourage everybody to watch live television and really think, you know, about the small details that are making it that slick, because that's really the question that gets put on us often is, I want it to be really, really slick. I don't want it to look clunky. You know, I really want it to feel like a TV grade broadcast. So expose yourself to as much of that as possible. possible, then there comes people like us and sort of say, okay, I've watched that, and I really like that aspect of the show. I really liked how they used graphics and things, you know, and then we can advise how that can be sort of woven into your event, and take those details, because at the end of the day, the people who've been doing this for the longest is broadcast television. You know, that's what's been around for years, and we are constantly now borrowing techniques from them and bringing into the hybrid event space, and that's what's kind of really exciting.
Thanks so much for that. That's great advice from all three of you. And we do have a couple of other questions, which we will get back to those who have submitted those and pick the minds of our experts a bit further. But speaking of live TV, the credits would have rolled and we will have missed the end. So we'll wrap things up there. Thank you so much to everyone sitting on the panel today and everyone who's logged in to watch. Thank you very much for attending, shooting through your questions. And hopefully this will be a nice aid on your journey through back into in-person with Freedom Day, and also into the world of hybrid events, or to complement your journey that you're already going through with hybrid events. Thank you for logging in, and we will see you all very soon.